Hello, I'm Manny Rivero from the University of South Florida Jim Walter Partnership Center, and you're watching Tampa Bay Community Network.
Hi, I'm Bill Hodges, and this is Spotlight on Government. And we've got a very interesting gentleman with us today, Manny Rivero. And Manny is representing Jim Walter's Partnership Center at USF.
That's right.
And that's a big title. What is the Jim Walter Partnership Center?
Jim Walter
In 3 words or less.
It creates partnerships, it leverages opportunities, and it empowers communities.
Hey, that's pretty sharp. How long has this partnership center been in effect, and how did it get started? And I understand you go right back to the beginnings of it, correct?
I was very fortunate and blessed that at the time that Jim Walter Sr. passed, I got to meet the Jim Walter family, and they were very interested in maintaining the legacy of Jim Walter in Tampa. He's a homegrown, if you grew up here, Jim Walter was a homegrown success story.
And a little bit about him. Let's take a minute or two, because we have a lot, 25% of the American population is moving at all times.
Right.
So a lot of people won't know who that is. Can we just take a minute and kind of give it a little bio?
Sure. Jim Walter, if you're a Tampa native or lived here long enough, Jim Walter is a homegrown success story. After World War II, basically out of Plant City, he came up with the idea of manufactured homes for returning veterans after World War II.
Okay.
So the whole concept of manufactured homes being built in an assembly line type of format.
Oh, modular home kind of
homes,
thing?
yeah,
Okay.
was Jim Walter Homes, and he became very successful. And his business was headquartered in Tampa. It still is operating out of here, but it used to be in the old, where the Target in Del Mabry is at now in 275. That used to be the old Jim Walter headquarter building.
Oh,
so
all right.
if you grew up here, that was a landmark building, you know. About 15 years ago, he passed on, and the Jim Walter Jr. and Robert Walter wanted to figure a way of maintaining the legacy of the father. And he had done a lot of great things in this community, gave back a lot, you know, created a lot of jobs, you know, and basically helped the local economy. And they wanted to maintain that legacy of the father in the family. So
it's a nice thing for somebody to do.
Incredible vision from their sons. So it's one of those things that happened to be at the right time, at the right place, you know, and I was blessed by being fortunate enough to meet, you know, both Jimmy Walter and Bob Walter, and looking at the idea of how do you do this, something that has a legacy that goes beyond time. So the family raised a small endowment at the University of South Florida named the Jim Walter Partnership Center. So the Walter family.
We're talking a small endowment, you're talking about $600,000.
It's not a very large one.
Well, that's still,
yeah,
for many of us, $600,000 is a pretty good chunk of change.
Yes, we were looking at being able to leverage those funds, because back when we started raising the money, there was a program at the state of Florida that we could, if we raised money from the private sector, the state would match it. So we kept our end of the agreement. We went out and talked to private sector individuals and folks that were familiar with the Walter family, and they gave. And we raised the endowment fund. And then when it came time for the state to honor its piece, we right now have a number that basically says we're entitled to it, but the current program has, you know, been right now mothballed, for lack of a better word, until, you know, they decide that this is a priority. But
so until we get a new governor?
Maybe, you know, I just think that if we're going to harness, you know, the resources of the private sector, and, you know, the best thing that I could do when I'm speaking to someone from the private sector and talking about education and the future of education in this country is being able to say, if you were to contribute to this endowment, you know, then the state will match you. It might not even be dollar to dollar. I'll take 50 cents on the dollar, but it'll leverage your resources. The private sector understands that, you know, and that incentive has been taken away.
That's kind of a shame,
It is a shame.
especially with an organization like this. So you have this organization set up, and you took it over as the executive director. What is your background?
My background, I'm a practitioner by trade, is what I always tell folks. I started out as a student intern a long time ago in South Florida in the Department of Community Affairs. And I oversaw federal programs that work with communities, nonprofits. And that gave me the experience on how to write grants, how to develop partnerships, how to navigate local government. I was also, from there, I became a nonprofit director, hence the background of being able to maintain an organization using different funding sources to address the issues impacting a community. I've done hurricane recovery because I was involved in the hurricane recovery after Andrew.
Okay.
So I've done this work from the federal side. And then I've also been a consultant to private sector developers that have done affordable housing, because I'm also an affordable housing developer. I've built affordable housing back in South Florida before I went to the federal government. So I've kind of looked at distressed communities, issues impacting communities from both the local government side, from the nonprofit side, from the federal side, and from the private sector side. And now I'm at a university.
Sounds like you've got a lot of background you bring to this job. What does it take in grants in a year to keep an organization like this moving?
You probably, depending on the scope of what you're trying to launch, the more resources, of course, the more impact that you have. Minimally,
yes.
So
money talks.
Money talks, and it has become more difficult, and I would say in the last few years to be able to get, funding. Foundations, public money is getting tighter, more competitive. The needs are greater. Like I mentioned a minute ago, the incentives have been taken away from the private sector. So you have to be very ingenious, but probably anywhere from $150,000 to $250,000. You want to be able to have that kind of resource available to keep operating. But there's, depending on what programs and contracts.
That's modest.
That's modest. I don't waste resources. Having been in the nonprofit sector, you will find that my offices are very eclectic in the way that the furniture is designed. I don't believe in wasting any resources. And I'm very efficient with anybody that donates equipment or supplies. So,
So people could donate to you equipment, supplies, that would be a tax.
That could be a tax deduction.
Tax-free?
Yes. And if I can't use it, I have enough churches or nonprofits that could use the equipment. So it's not just about what I do. If the resource is there, back to school, sometimes there's communities that are looking for backpacks. I don't necessarily need backpacks for myself or University of South Florida students, but I might be working in a community or a school that might need them.
And it might be help your outreach.
Help the
in order
outreach.
For you to have them,
Right.
be able to take them out there as your gift to
As
them.
a gift. So, anytime that a company wants to help the community out and they've got a resource, I'd be more than happy to sit down and talk to them, because there's always somebody in need that we could match up with what that resource is.
I'm thinking there are a lot of companies out there who have advertising things that they have made and maybe still have 25 or 50 of them on the shelf. Backpacks, books, whatever. These would be things that you'd be interested in having, even if they have a company name on them?
I don't think that, I think that the more that the private sector gets involved in maybe sponsoring some of this stuff, it's not always we need a check. Sometimes they could sponsor an event, or they could provide materials or supplies, or host a meeting in which they provide the luncheons. There's always an opportunity, to look at how can you help, and how, if we at the Jim Walter Partnership Center don't have an answer right away, I'll get back with you and find out who might need that resource. So,
let's talk about the Partnership Center itself. On an average day, what are the kinds of things that you might be doing?
A lot of it it's a combination of things because I get all sorts of calls. The Partnership Center is based on the principle that if you're going to engage the community, you have to then be out in the community. You have to go to their events, go to the night meetings, go to the church meetings, understand what the community is asking for, where you could open a door. So part of my day could be in getting phone calls from either faith-based leaders or nonprofit leaders, or maybe sometimes a company, looking at how do you access or how do you meet, or how can you provide some technical assistance, or are there students that could work on a project? A lot of the community engaged work that I do emanates from what the community wants the university to be involved in.
So the professors in the university will say, I've got a project that I need to have these people work on?
It could work both ways. It could be a faculty member that says, I'm interested in this area of research, or I've got these students that want to be involved, and do you have something in the community that, that they could work on? Or it could be in reverse. I might have a project that I'm shopping around within the university and say, is there a faculty member that might be interested in putting some students on this? I do also have a program called Federal Work Study, in which I get certain students that work for the Jim Walter Partnership Center that then they could be working with, in this case, the school system to help them with their tutor mentoring program. So there's resources that if a certain school that I'm working at right now is looking at, and right now we're working with 4 schools, we're going to be placing USF students in those classes where those students have the greatest need.
That's one area.
That's one area.
What are some of the other things? You've mentioned churches. What would you do with faith-based organizations?
Faith-based organizations, I think, are the vanguard of communities. Okay, if you zeroed out tomorrow all federal programs, all state programs, every type of money that there is out there, the churches will always stand. The faith-based community is always going to be there. You have a lot of assets that sit in the pews sometimes, that sometimes, are not utilized properly. There are churches that have, depending on the inclination, if they looked at the assets that sit in their pew, a lot of potential that they haven't harnessed, with volunteers, with expertise, etc. Right now, I'm working with a church in Waimama, for instance, that the church has a strong component of health ministry. They basically talk about that if we're going to worship what we don't see, then we must have a healthy body so that we can pray or worship properly. So they're very much involved into nutrition, health, physical, and working in communities in which
the temple is sound.
The temple is sound, because if you don't have the body sound, then it's hard to connect with the unseen and be spiritually sound as well. So this is a faith-based ministry that's looking at health issues. And depending on the community, in many communities, you've got folks that do not have health care or do not have services that they can access, because they cannot afford it, or et cetera. There's a lot of doctors and dentists and folks that would be interested in volunteering their time. And here's where a church that's interested in organizing those assets, in which folks that want to give X amount of hours as a doctor or as a dentist or chiropractor, you pick then they have health fairs, and they basically connect the people to these healthcare providers. So they're trying to create a faith-based clinic at their church so that folks can get, let's say, primary services at the church during the week.
There are some very big churches in this area. Several in Brandon that are 5,000 members. They're big. What could those churches do to help you, and what could you do to help them?
I'd be very interested in talking to some of the larger congregations and looking at how do you take the concept of asset mapping, looking at what resources actually sit at your church on any given Sunday.
Asset mapping,
Asset mapping
sounds like a great idea. I think I even know what it might mean, but define it the way you're
Asset
using
mapping is looking at, what resources you have, and you have resources of your expertise, you have resources of who you know, you have resources of where you work at. Your neighbors are assets. So you
it.
look
So
at
they'd really want to collect that information
Right.
from their parishioners, right?
right. You look at who sits in the pews, what expertise do they have, what time do they have available, where does their heart incline to do if they wanted to provide service.
What a great idea. I
You
don't
know.
know that, I've never been involved with a church that does that.
Well,
and
it's-
asks that kind of information.
It's looking at harnessing the pew as a resource. Every church, every community has assets. I don't care how poor the church is. Okay, every pew, every church,
Are you
every
a plumber,
person.
electrician?
What is it?
What is it? What is your skill?
Right.
Okay.
I mean,
Or skills.
Great question in a community is, and sometimes you really do need to ask around. I need to fix a shelf. I need to put something up. Do you know of a good handyman? Okay, because you're letting somebody in your house,
yeah,
and
right.
Handyman, there might be companies that can service you, but if there's somebody at the church that is a handyman or a handy person that has this kind of profession, who better than the church being able to refer people from that church to the community? That almost gives you, a feeling that if church so-and-so says, this person goes to our church, he's a handyman, he does work for us, we recommend him highly, then that gives that person in the church more job opportunities, more jobs, and has a referral that comes from a faith-based ministry. And then you, the recipient, get somebody that comes into your house that you feel comfortable with.
So you would help them set up some kind of assessment?
It's looking at how churches are in a position, depending on how they're set up. Do they have a 501c3 or a nonprofit affiliate? To look at, and some larger churches are getting into homeless ministries and getting into housing and some other stuff like that. Look at how you're structured as a corporation. So you can have your church here, you might have a nonprofit subsidiary that basically provides social services. Example, Catholic Charities. Catholic Church is an entity, and Catholic Charities is a nonprofit. It's Catholic Charities that's the nonprofit arm of the Catholic Church that provides the services, and that people give money to. A lot of other denominations could borrow, from that playbook.
So your organization, though, if this big church sitting down there, I won't mention which one, but any one of them, said, we really should assess our membership, see who they are, what they are, how they do. Would you come in as a partner with them and help them to figure out how to make that assessment?
I'd be willing to sit down with them to explore that, because
Okay.
it requires them to think differently on how they're going to approach the ministry. There's a lot of potentials on how does your youth ministry go beyond just singing or being in the choir or doing one event, or being more engaged in maybe an after-school tutoring program. Okay, you've got a lot of schools with kids that need tutors that maybe their parents don't have a degree of education that can help those kids out. A lot of testing nowadays. Okay,
Too much
testing, and so but not enough learning. So
I'll drink to that.
Okay,
And I don't even drink, but
yeah.
I'll drink to that.
There we go. So looking at youth as a resource on how we can help other kids, stay in school, and not give up. That's a way of using youth ministries in a different manner,
So you would go in to the church and help them figure all this out? Is that part of the partnership?
I could, yes, depending on what they would want to do and to what extent they're interested. I'm always open to talk to a group or a church that's, committed into improving the quality of life for their community.
Okay.
Going beyond, I think that the best ministry is when when you get beyond the four walls of the church, because you're housed in a community. So,
Right, yes. Yes, I agree.
You know a tree by its fruit. So if churches, which I think are the untapped resource of the future, okay, looked at just the concept of asset mapping, and looking at what do we have that can be better organized, then it's a way of them
I
being able
guess
to.
that's where I'm still trying to get my arm around it. The asset mapping and the church and you,
Right.
how do the Venn diagrams work?
Well,
where you
how it would work
overlap?
is that, let's say you mentioned, let's say, it doesn't have to be a large congregation, it could be a small congregation, but you've got mass in a large congregation. A large church would want to be involved, would want to be more engaged in the community. They're trying to see how they can be more effective. Then it's a matter of sitting down with them and saying, okay, let's look at, developing, and I could work with faculty on that. I could work with a graduate student to develop some questions that they would want to ask.
Okay.
And a lot of it is driven by what the church or the community organization.
Well, it's accomplished.
It's accomplished.
Yeah.
It's not. I'm going to give you a concept, and I'm going to facilitate, like you're doing with me now.
Okay.
The questions. What would you want to ask them? What is it that you're trying to achieve? What are your goals? And then trying to see if once you collect that information, because one of the things that I've been looking at, and I've been working on because of my background on hurricane recovery. Okay, I was involved in the recovery after Andrew. At that time, we were nonpartisan when people got hurt. Okay, so we had billions of dollars to
Right.
help the folks in need. The problem is that when you're a federal official, you come into a community and you've got everything level like it was in Hurricane Andrew, and you ask, so who's in charge in the community? Who's on first?
Right.
You realize that in the chaos, okay, of your house being destroyed and you basically being without any electricity, there's disarray. And here you've got the resources, and yet you don't have a command control structure. Well, neighborhood associations, if trained properly, have a structure already built in. So we have a training program that we've been trying to roll out. It's to empower communities. We live in Florida. So you have neighborhood associations that basically meet every month. We have most neighborhood associations, especially in suburbia, you have a architecture review committee, you have a garage sale committee, you have a committee on the Christmas, the Christmas whatever.
And a committee
Halloween,
on committees.
And committees on committees. Yet we live in Florida and we don't have a hurricane recovery committee in our neighborhood associations. And we should begin to really think hard because we've been lucky for the last 10 years.
Have you talked with Wanda on this?
I've talked to, the thing is, the resources.
That's the county.
The neighborhood associations have to be able to put this as a priority. Okay, so there is a program through the county that funds neighborhood associations, to do small projects.
Training.
And to me, this training, even though it's not something that you're going to use tomorrow, it's like your spare tire. You need to have it.
Yes.
Okay, because eventually it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. If that happens, there's less federal money in the future coming down for disasters. If Hurricane Charlie would have come up Tampa Bay, in 2005, we would still, it would have been a mess because Tampa's been spared, but the reality is that would have been going through a metropolitan area, that the impact would have been so large that it would have taken years for us to recover.
But Pinellas County,
In Pinellas is
so much of it's underwater.
Pinellas County. If you don't have a boat, you better learn how to be self-sufficient.
Get out of there early.
Get out of there early, or if you're going to bunker the folks in, then what do you know your neighbors? You don't. Not everyone needs a generator. We just need to know who has the generator.
Right.
Okay. Every community goes back to assets. So do you know that the person in the corner of your street is retired military? That comes in handy at night when you have no power and somebody's got to patrol your streets. Okay, you want to know where the generators are at because you don't need to have one. You just need to know who has one because what happens after a big disaster is that there's a lot of barbecuing going on.
Right.
Because your food's going to spoil in 2 or 3 days.
Exactly, you're right.
Okay? So it's a matter of organizing those resources into a plan. And then if you've got nurses and you've got people with special needs or you've got elderly, do you know where they're at? And do you have a youth group that can go and see Betty or Miss Jane or whatever down the street to see if she's all right? You know, what medicines does she take?
Let me ask you, I've asked you a lot of questions here, and we put out a lot of things, but surely in the time we've been together, I haven't asked you something you really want to tell the people. So why don't you take the next minute or so, and anything I've missed that you really want to get across, how people can help you, what you need, whatever, and just tell everybody what you think.
I think that the best resource is you guys here, the community, the folks that are listening. And the community is a broad term. It could, like we've been talking about churches, we've been talking about neighborhood organizations, we've been talking about nonprofits, we've been the private sector. There's a lot of opportunity to do good and also do well if you want to. You know, I think that, you know, I'm very open to having conversations with groups that are really committed to helping communities help themselves. A lot of our stuff it's not about a handout. It's about giving people tools. Once you have those assets, it's up to you to organize them. It's up to you to make a difference. So in any of the areas that we've talked about, we do a grassroots leadership training program, which is about empowering communities. We've talked about disaster recovery training. You know, I'm working a lot with tutor mentoring in the kids in the school. You know, this is the future of our workforce. We need to make sure that, you know, we keep our kids in school and they stay educated. It doesn't mean that they necessarily have to go to a 4-year university. It could be a community college. It could be a training school, but we need to keep the students in school. Any way that your company or your organization would want to help, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation to see if there's something that I could then work with either USF students or faculty to see if there's interest. I'm not a miracle worker. All I can do is try and see if there is points of commonality, and if we can find a way of being able to work with you on an area that you're interested in us being involved, and I can find students or something that we're working on to find resources, then I'd be a resource to them.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot of bases that you're trying to cover with a very minimal amount of money, and I think that's great. Manny, I really appreciate having you on the show. Jim Walters, Partnership Center. And you're creating partnerships, so all kinds of different groups, You've given our audience a great opportunity to help you by calling in. They can call in and talk with you in your office or get on your website if they want more information. I thank you so much.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
I'm Bill Hodges. This is Spotlight on Government. You're unique, you're special, and you're great. Tell yourself so often because you are and you know. Manny Rivero, I'm so happy you're with us, and I hope that the Walters Partnership Center is highly successful and great things happen for you. We'll see you on the next Spotlight on Government.